I never know what I'm gonna do until I go up there. And so even listening today, I kept thinking, okay, I'm gonna do that one. No, I'll do that one. I'll do that one. And then I kept thinking, do I go dark or light? And I'm gonna do both. So you all give me permission to pick these pieces. And I have the writing, the words on the page as a crutch, but all of the stories, whether in All Souls or in my second book, Easter Rising, a memoir of roots and rebellion, or in the one I'm currently working on, all of them really are stories that were first told orally among friends and people I work with. So a lot of the work that I've done over the years is about using story to help people transform difficult things. I hate using the word trauma these days; it's overused. Everything's called trauma, but transform that tough stuff into voice, agency, a way to be in the world. So the piece I'm going to read first is really a piece that remembering that story, telling that story, writing that story, really told me why I do the work that I do and why I bring together community organizing and storytelling. This is in the aftermath of the loss of 4 of my siblings growing up. I'm about 16 or 17 at this point, and anyone who read All Souls, you know that lost a lot of family members. I'm one of 11, single mother in the projects in Southie. Also a sister who was paralyzed, is alive to this day after being pushed off the roof in a fight over pills. But all of the other 4, well, I can say died violently, but 3 involved in the streets. 1 is suicide. 1 a baby. This is murder, basically, a baby that was denied access to the hospital 1 year before Medicaid existed, which is also violence, murder. An era some people want to go back to, when hospitals would only admit a certain quota of poor kids on welfare. And so they had fulfilled their quota for the day of this hospital. So this baby, Patrick Michael, was sent home and died that night. So growing up in that family, in that neighborhood, it wasn't just us, it was a lot of other neighbors dropping like flies all the time. A lot of the violence of the busing days, the riots that happened took place right outside our apartment in the projects. And then in the years following that is when people were dropping out of school, joining up to rob banks, and so on and so forth. So a lot of my siblings died from being involved in some of that street stuff. I'm gonna read a piece from in the aftermath of that, where again, like you were saying, all that stuff was normal, and it was just life. This is how people live. And in the aftermath of all of that, I'm feeling kind of fucked up, but don't have words for it because nobody's naming these things, and people. Well, plus we lived with an imposed code of silence. You weren't to name these things, and so you just accept that it's normal. You move on. You suck it up. Go forward. So I started to suffer kind of like a kind of post-traumatic response, I'd say, as a teenager, in the aftermath of all that, where we didn't have the words for all those things that we were experiencing, that were happening right before our eyes. Plus being told that stuff is over there. That's what Black people do. Being told both by the gangsters around our neighborhood, the politicians around the neighborhood, as well as the outside world who even discusses that stuff. The media didn't come, they ignored it. South Boston was just written off as backwoods, white trash, fuck them. So, growing up in that kind of situation, you're ignored by both the left and the right. People who would call themselves progressives just wrote you off as white trash that didn't need anything. You have that white privilege stuff, so you'll be fine. And so you just start to experience all kinds of physical symptoms. And this is a pretty common thing in a lot of neighborhoods like this. It's one thing to experience that stuff, but it's another thing not to be able to talk about it. So I was running around to emergency rooms all over the city of Boston, all kinds of weird symptoms, except the one that was except the thing that was really happening. I'd go in there with all kinds of physical symptoms that they kept, telling me there's no such thing, you need to go home, you're fine. And so finally a doctor sat me down, asked me, look, why do you keep coming in here? Who are you? Where do you come from? How many people are in your family? Once I had to start counting to figure out how many are in my family, because we started with 11 and lost 4, my sister's kind of alive, kind of dead. Once he saw that, he knew that I needed to talk to someone. And this is what storytelling's about. It's about being able to name things, say the words, and to work that part of the brain that's completely shut down in the aftermath of atrocities, the prefrontal cortex. So I decided I'm not going to follow his suggestion to go to a therapist, and going to ignore that. He thinks I'm crazy. I need to find a different doctor to diagnose me, to find out what's really wrong. But then I had this crazy symptom that was, my head was so heavy I could barely lift it off my shoulders, and I just needed to find out what was going on. So I went into the therapist, figuring the doctors, they're ignoring me. I'd overstayed my welcome at all the hospitals in town. So I went into the therapist. He had given me the name of, on Beacon Hill, the fanciest part of Boston. And a steep hill it was. It was all I could do to carry my heavy head up Joy Street. Resting at a stoop on the way up Beacon Hill, I wondered if making the appointment had been the right thing to do. After all the symptoms I'd had came back, along with some new ones, I gave in to the idea of seeing the therapist. Doctors were still avoiding me, and of course, I couldn't talk to my family about my impending death. I thought maybe I could get the therapist to help convince the doctors that I wasn't crazy and should be taken seriously for once. From the foot of Joy Street, the hill looked steep. I felt like one of the older people I saw, starving to hold on to every railing they came to. The therapist watched me as I tried to answer a question, only her third in what seemed like small talk to get acquainted. Shit, here we go again, I thought. All my life, I'd struggled with the answer to the question, how many are in your family? And it wasn't getting any easier. My mother had lost the baby Patrick a year before I was born, but we always included him in the count, since we thought of him as a kind of guardian sibling. As a child, sometimes I would say 11 but 1 died. People would ask, shocked, 11 brothers and sisters? I was proud to be from such a big family. Only the Rooneys and the Noonans had more. 11 living kids, beating me by 1. The Rooneys got the most shocked responses, all 11 being boys. So it was best not to be around any Rooneys when the question came up. Once I started spending time beyond Southie, though, my 11 would throw people for a loop, and they'd make the same old joke about Irish Catholics and rabbits. After Davy died, I started saying 11 but 2 died. But then people exclaimed, oh my God, I wanted to know how the 2 had died. Once I saw how people recoiled at the mention of someone jumping off a roof, I usually didn't feel like talking about it. I learned to say 9, relieved to have to deal only with the Irish Catholics comment. But I felt guilty about cutting Davy out of account, even though I no longer cared about childish birth rate contests. So I started including both Davy and Patrick again. But now, with Frankie and Kevin dead and only 7 of us remaining alive, I had answered a few times 11 before it died, only to see the person look horrified, not wanting to ask how. Then, to comfort them, I'd explained that it wasn't that bad, that I only knew 3 of them, that Patrick was a baby who died before I was born, which only made their faces contort more. I had to do some quick math in my head before answering at all these days, since my sister Kathy was now permanently brain damaged and increasingly schizophrenic. She talked to herself all day and wrote childhood rhymes on any piece of paper she could find, an existence that seemed somewhere between life and death. I felt more like I was one of 6, not 7 survivors, and that brought me back to thinking, who's next? Then I'd want to call home to make sure everyone was okay, or wonder whether the strange feeling in my throat was cancer. I'd only pause for a few seconds before giving my 11 but 4 died version, but the therapist looked confused. She straightened up in her chair to pursue the question further. How did they die? She asked straightforwardly. I was glad she wasn't asking with the wide eyes that usually accompany the question. Anytime Ma had to answer the question, she said they were all in a car accident. I guess she wanted to keep it simple rather than getting into suicide, jumps and falls from rooftops, bank robberies, and prison deaths. And she would never talk about the night she lost her baby, Patrick. But a car accident? Tired of Grandpa's admonishing that I should say nothing to nobody, I was saddened by Ma's shame about the ways my brothers died. Ma was the one who'd always gone against the hush-hush Irish ways of her parents. Okay, here goes, I thought. Remember Patrick, even though you never met him, and keep Kathy off the list of dead. I opened my left thumb to remember that Cappy was not dead, and opened my right-hand fingers to keep the count limited to 4. I started with the baby, Patrick Michael, who died of pneumonia, just to be done with that story. I received his name in reverse, I said, glad to begin with a less tragic fact before telling about the baby being denied access to the hospital. There, that's done with, I thought, closing one finger and leaving 3 open. The therapist, her face somber, looked like she was really listening. The hospital didn't have to take welfare babies back then, I said, changing the subject from Ma's banging on neighbors' doors with the baby already dead in her arms, which was still lingering in the therapist's face. Before Medicaid, I added, when she looked surprised at welfare babies being turned away. Then I tried to turn the conversation to how Reagan wanted to go back to those days. I guess I was trying to figure out whether she was a Republican, in which case I'd have reason to never come back. But she didn't give away much about herself. What about the other ones, she asked. Huh? The others who died? Davey jumped off the roof and killed himself, but he was mentally ill. He died of breakdown when he was 14. I knew he must have really wanted to go, though, because he put up a fight against the EMTs who tried to save him. So it's okay, I figure, what he did. She said nothing during my pause. Suicide, I mean, I said, interrupting the silence. You know how they say they're going to hell? I knew he must have been in a lot of pain every single day to have done that. I added, he died 9 hours later, not sure what else to add in the face of her searching stare. The therapist's eyes were glazed and her expression became sadder. Oh, no, really, I said, panicked. It was rough at first, but I got over it. We all did. You have to. Shit, I never should have come here. I should have lied when she asked how many were in the family. I could have said 11, and we could have talked about other stuff, like how doctors pay no attention to how sick I feel every single day. I couldn't wait to leave. What about the other 2, she asked. I couldn't believe she wanted more. I knew I had to cut the rest short and get out, never to return. She looked like she was going to say, oh, you poor thing, which was always worse than when people said, holy shit. Sympathy only made me feel embarrassed, and the sympathizer looked unstable to me, not strong. How old were the others, she asked, regaining composure. Frankie was 23 and Kevin had just turned 22. Fuck, should I pull the car accident thing? Or just tell the truth and get it over with? Frankie died first, I said. He got involved in a bank heist, you know, Southie. I hesitated, realizing that she and most people didn't know. He was found in the first getaway car, covered in trash bags and pushed down under the seat. He'd been shot in the crossfire, but detectives said he could have lived if he was dropped off in a hospital or something. But, you know, I guess they thought he might have talked then. That's what the detectives told Ma anyway. I almost added that Ma was now saying that one detective told her Frankie was strangled to death in the back seat. I looked at the one finger I still had raised. Maybe after Kevin I can get to the fact that I'm sick of the dog. I need to find a good doctor. Then Kevin died after he did a jewelry store heist and went to prison. That stuff was much more Kevin's lifestyle than Frankie's. Frankie was a Golden Gloves boxer and was much more into his body and lifting weights and stuff. Anyway, the detectives were working Kevin while he was in prison, trying to get information about the robbery Frankie had died in. The detectives said they had a video that showed Kevin trying to stop his partner from shooting the jeweler, and they're only going to show it in court if Kevin flipped. Word got out that Kevin was going to snitch for a lesser sentence. I felt it all spilling out of my mouth, but all I could think about was the weight of my head. Long story short, I told her, he was found hanging in prison, outside his prison cell. Whether he did it because he couldn't deal with the prospect of snitching, or someone else did it because they couldn't deal with the prospect of snitching, he never did talk. Let me see, I said, still looking down, my head feeling heavier. Kevin died. I had to stop and count months on my fingers. Well, Frankie died in July and Kevin died the following March. What's that? They died 8 months apart? I raised my head to look at the therapist. She was buckled over in her chair, tears streaming down her face. Oh my God, no, really, it's not that bad, I said. This is all a long time ago. She got out her tissues and wiped her cheeks and asked, how long ago was it? Once again I had to stop and count. Well, Frankie died about 3 months ago. Kevin's been dead almost a whole year. Walking through the Boston Common to the subway, I couldn't get the therapist's tears out of my head. Even though so many Southie families have buried their kids in recent years, I thought for the first time, most people don't live like this. I saw that all the deaths in the family and in the neighborhood were not just normal. All through my time with the therapist, I had planned to stop in at Mass General Hospital on my way home. If Dr. Reynolds could see that my head was lopsided and that I wasn't imagining the whole thing, he'd have to take me seriously for once. But by the time I got to Tremont Street, where I would have turned left toward the hospital, I realized that my head wasn't so heavy anymore. So that was a major, for me, that was the first time, that was really a turning point. I mean, this book, Easter Rising, really, it's about a descent into hell, and that's probably the rock bottom part. And then resurrection and, coming back to the world and finding a way to be in the world. But just the experience of seeing in her tears, all the tears that we weren't crying, in my family, in the neighborhood, myself, that really, and the way I felt just a little bit lighter leaving that office and wanting to go back a few times, that told me that this is the way forward. And so for about 10 years, I've found a way to use the story in the world through community organizing, connecting with people across town. Not in my neighborhood, because in my neighborhood you still couldn't talk about that stuff. You'd be killed for telling these stories. But in Black and Latino neighborhoods across town, where people were saying the words, where people were telling the stories, where people were building community through story and building coalitions through story, and then eventually being able to bring it back home. But that to me was community organizing, was where, when people ask you, where did you find your voice? Like, that for me was it, because that was a place to take really fucked up shit and transform it into a voice, into a way to be in the world, into something useful, rather than either stuffing it down or going the route that a lot of my neighbors went, which was to numb it through alcohol and pretty much heroin. So these days, through the storytelling coalitions that we're doing in Boston, I'm doing it in Belfast and Dublin as well, just helping people to use them for not only for their personal transformations, but to build kind of useful coalitions to work on the issues that impacted people's lives. I was going to read a funny piece, but there's no time. So thanks.